Hi, this is Simon Upstall. I hope you're all safe and well, and welcome to another tutorial for Apple Motion. And today we're going to be taking a look at this electric reveal effect. So it's probably not electric, but I don't really know what other name to give it. But the technique for achieving this effect I think is quite interesting. So I hope you'll enjoy this one. So first of all, let's look at our project setup. As usual, I'm using 1920 1080, 24 frames a second, duration of 10 seconds. So my first step is to create some text. So I'm going to select the text tool. I'm going to type the word electric. Center line, reset its transform. Let's increase the scale till we're pretty much edge to edge of the screen. And then I'll turn on the grid and let's just adjust its baseline until we're in the center. So the point I want to make right at the start is that this process is not going to be automatic. You won't just be able to type some new text and the whole effect updates. We're going to have to do some manual work, but it shouldn't be too difficult. So this text is now going to be our template, and in order to make it easier to use this template, let's just turn off the face and let's just go with red for this. So what we're going to do is we're going to zoom in to the first letter, the E. We're going to select the Bezier tool. Let's turn on the HUD. So we don't want a fill, we want a white outline, and we want a width of 5 pixels. So what I'm going to do is just basically draw around these letters. So the nice thing about this font, and the reason I've picked it, is because it's going to be really easy. A lot of this is just going to be clicking and making nice, clean points like that. So really pretty easy. Let's do the same for the L. I might well start to speed this up at some point. So there you go, that's the L done. Well, we've got another E, so what we can do is we can duplicate this E, and let's move it up. And then I'm just going to come to its position, just move that across. So I will spend a bit of time on the C because we've got a curve. So let's come back to our Bezier tool. Let's do the inner curve first. So I want to come to the point at which the curve starts, just before the curve starts like that. And then I want to click and drag in the middle of the curve like that. Keep my Bezier handle vertical. And then I'm going to click at the other edge of the curve. So then we can do the same here. So click where the curve starts, click and drag where the middle of the curve is, come to the end of the curve, and then close it up. It's not perfect, but you just don't need to make them perfect. So I'm going to speed on through to the end here. It's manual, but it's really surprisingly quick. And it's kind of a fun job. And the more you can refine your shape drawing skills, the better. So don't pass up any opportunity to do it. Okay, so there we go. We've got our shapes. They're not actually perfect, as I say, but that really doesn't matter for the purposes of what we're going to be doing. So what we're going to do is I'm going to turn off that original text because we don't need it anymore, or not for now. And then I'm going to come to 4 seconds on the timeline, and I'm going to select all of these shapes, and I'm going to hit O on the keyboard. So now they only last for 4 seconds. So I'm going to keep them all selected, and then I'm going to come to Behaviors, Shape, Right On. Then what I want to do is I want to select every alternate behavior and come to the direction for them and select reverse. So that way, some of them are drawing on forward and some are drawing on backwards, but you can mix that up to taste. So then what we're going to do is we're going to select all of the right on behaviors. That's command clicking them. And we're going to duplicate them. So that's command D, or I guess you could go to edit, duplicate. Let's do that. So while these are all still selected, I'm going to select erase for the shape outline. So now we've got a drawing on and a drawing off that's happening simultaneously. If we open up the timeline editor and make some space for ourselves, it's a good idea to offset these so they don't all start at once. Well, we'll need to select both of those and just hit I on the keyboard at a certain point. I'm just going to do this randomly. I don't know whether random is good in this particular instance. I think it probably is. So then let's come back and see what we've done. It's a bit more interesting, I think, because we've randomized those starts. So I just want to roughen up these letters a bit, or these shapes rather. So I'm going to import a texture, and I'll put a link to these textures in the comments. So I'm going to import rough texture, and we can turn it off. So what I want to do is use this as a mask for this entire group. So I'm going to right-click, add image mask, and I'm going to use the rough texture, which I've turned off because we don't actually need to see it, as the mask source, and I'm going to switch to luminance. So you might just be able to faintly see that that's had an effect, but what we can now do is come to color levels, and we can either apply this to the image mask itself or to the original texture, and just crunch it together so that we're getting a little bit of this sort of breakup here. I just think it's going to make this effect look more organic than if those letters were completely clean. So let's call this group shapes, and we can turn it off and close it down, and let's make a new group. And in this new group, I'm going to add generators clouds. And this clouds is going to be my colored fill, and I'm going to use the shapes as the mask for it. So let's just set up that gradient, and it's really up to you what sort of colors you have here. I'm going to go for blue at one end and I think kind of green at the other. See how that works out as a starting point. And then I'm going to add an image mask to this, right-click, add image mask, and I'm going to use that shapes group as the source. And now you'll see we've got this organic colored fill. And it might be an idea to just crank up the speed of that so we're getting some nice variation over time. You can probably go all the way up to 2, I think. So I just want to punch the levels on this just a little bit. So I'm going to come to Filters, Color, OpenEXR Tone Map. Let's increase the exposure to 2, say, and bring down the knee high to 3.5. And that's just given us some brighter values to play with in there. We might want to adjust that to taste, but let's stick with 2 for the time being. So now let's come on to the interesting part, which is the feathered electrical effect around the edges of the shapes. So I'm going to call this group that we just made base, and I'm going to close it on down. And I'm going to make a new group. And into this group, I'm going to add generators, caustics. I'm going to put this caustics into a new group. So object, new group, and put that in there. So that's inside that main group. I'm going to call this group feather source. And then I'm going to duplicate that caustics group that I've made, right-click, duplicate, and let's call this A and B. So let's set up caustics A. I'm going to turn off B for the time being. We want a size here of 0.08, and let's go for a speed of 0.6. And I want to set that brightness value up to 50. Then I want to come to Properties, Rotation, and I want to add to the rotation a rate behavior. And let's set that rate value to 2 degrees. So we're getting this rotating texture. Now, maybe we should actually increase the generator scale just so it's covering the canvas like that throughout that rotation. We don't, after 4 seconds, we don't need to worry too much about it, but so those values are going to work. So we're going to do effectively the same with B, but it's going to be very slightly different in terms of those values. So let's turn on B, come to caustics. I'm going to set the size to 0.12. the speed to 0.3. And again, let's set the brightness up to 50. And let's just copy that rate behavior onto that B caustics there. But then we'll change the value for the rate and we'll go with -4. And again, let's just increase that. Let's come to 4 seconds so we make sure we're safe. Let's increase those values till we've covered the canvas like so. So let's turn off this whole group and even that B inside there. So then what we're going to do is we're going to take that base group that we've made and we're going to right click, make clone layer. And I'm going to call this group feathers. So this is where the interesting part comes in. Let's come back to where we can actually see something. We're going to take that clone and we're going to apply filters, blur, compound blur. And we're going to use caustics A, that one there, as the compound blur map. And we're going to set that value to 64. I'm going to set the blend mode of this to add. And I'm also going to duplicate it, right click, duplicate. And for this one, we're going to come to filters. And for the compound blur source, we're going to select caustics B. For the B version, I'm just going to increase that blur amount to 128. So now we've got a slightly different thing happening. Obviously, they're rotating in opposite directions. They're slightly different sizes and slightly different speeds. And it's giving us what I think is a really, really nice effect. It's not in your face. It's quite subtle. If we wanted to increase it, we could come to filters, color, levels, and then we select alpha. And then we'll bring this white value in till we've started to punch it through a bit more. Really, that's pretty much to taste how far you want to go on that. And once we've added some glow, which is our next step, I think it's going to look better still. So I've renamed this group Feathers. We're going to look at the glow in 1 second, but first of all, I want to create some background. So I'm going to create a new group, and I'm going to import the texture called back wall. And I'm going to move this group to the back of the project. And then I'm going to select the back wall, come to color, hue saturation, and I'm going to bring the value way down, I think 0.1. And then select the group, add object, generators. I'm going to add another clouds generator, and I'm going to make the white tab very dark, nicely desaturated blue, somewhere around there. And I'm going to set its blend mode to screen and possibly knock it back a bit. Let's go for about 50%. Then let's add a color hue saturation to this group and also levels, I think. Let's actually swap the order of that, put the levels below. Just bring in the black and white just a little bit. Let's reduce the saturation down to around -0.3. Maybe just reduce that back wall saturation down to around -0.5. So now let's call this group BG for background and we can close it. So let's turn our attention to the glows. I'm going to select the feathers group. I'm going to right click and make clone layer. This new group I'm going to call glows. So with the clone selected, let's set its blend mode to add. And let's come to filters, blur, and let's select Gaussian blur. And let's right click, duplicate that. So the bottom blur I'm going to set to 64 and the top one to 128. And I'm also going to duplicate this because for a reason I'm going to explain a little bit later. So right click, duplicate, and I'm going to adjust these blurs. The bottom one is going to be 256 and the top one is going to be 512. So we've got now this wider, more diffuse glow. And there's a reason, which I'll explain later, why I've separated those out. So, like me, you're probably finding these colours a bit too extreme. So I'm going to come to this base group here, and I'm going to throw on a colour hue saturation. And let's wind that saturation back to -0.65. So the next thing I want to do is I want to add a light to this. So let's close all this up, and let's come to add object light. Because for the way my preferences are set up, I need to select all these groups and turn them to 3D. You will probably just need to answer yes when it asks you, do you want to switch to 3D? Let's increase this light to around 250, I think. And I think you can see what it's doing. It's kind of isolating a certain area of this. And what I want to do is I want to move it across the letters. So to do that, we're going to need to make a path for it to travel. Ideally, we'd want it to follow precisely all these letters being drawn on, but we're going to have to sort of fudge it a little bit. So, Object New Group, we're going to select the Bezier tool, and let's come to, let's say 2 seconds, or even 2.5. So with the Bezier tool, we're just going to trace out a path that takes care of the shapes that we can currently see. So hopefully you can see the kind of path that I'm drawing here. Doesn't have to be accurate, but it's good that it's following certain of these paths, and we want to end up here right at the end. So return, and that's my path. So then what I can do is I can select my light, and I can add a basic motion path. I can switch to geometry, and I can use that Bezier shape as the source. So now everything has disappeared, and that's because the motion path has put the light at 0 on Z rather than its default of 100. So everything is on the same plane as the light, and we can't see anything. So we can easily fix that by taking the light and putting it into this group that we've made here. I'm going to call that group lights. I'm going to add a few. And then we can simply adjust the Z position of this group. So I'm going to choose 50 pixels. And you can see it's reappeared. So I'm going to turn that Bezier shape off. I'm going to call it path A. So then there's one thing I've forgotten to do here, which is to shorten the duration of the motion path. So let's come to 4 seconds on the timeline, select the motion path and hit O on the keyboard. And now the light will travel across for the duration of our animation. Now you can probably see that the light is lighting up our back wall in between the characters. And to avoid that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to my background and just move it back so the light can't reach it. So I'm going to send it back to 1500 on Z, negative 1500, and you can see that's disappeared. We'll need to scale it back up again. You see it's too small. So let's go for something like 175. Because I'm going to be adding a camera later on. We might need to adjust that. So that's starting to work fairly well, I think. It's still not quite right because it's picking up on the glow areas. And what I'm going to do here is that secondary glow that we created, the much wider one, I'm going to turn off the lighting. And you see that's created a very different effect, which is that we've now got this sort of wide diffuse glow, but it's not picking up the path of the light. However, we don't really want to be seeing it here where the shapes are not very bright. And we can fix that by coming to Filters, Color, Threshold. And now it's just picking up those areas where the light is hitting it. So I think I might just move that threshold back just so we've got a little bit of it here as well. And that's looking better, I think. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this light. So right-click, Duplicate. And I'm going to come to that motion path, and we're going to switch its direction to reverse. So now we'll have the lights going opposite direction and both ending up at either end of the logo. As it happens, I think that motion path is not too bad for that reverse light. But what we could actually do is create a secondary path, so path B, and use that. But I think I'm going to leave it like this. So I think our background is a bit too dark really now. So I'm going to come back down to it, and I'm going to look at that for that hue saturation filter, and I'm going to increase that value to 1.3, I think. Now at least we can see that background that we've so painstakingly created. It doesn't want to be too strong, otherwise it's not going to make these glows look very good. I think that's a good balance there. So now I think we can look at the question of how to bring on our final text. So to do that, I'm going to dive down into the shapes group. And you remember we made a dummy text object that we could use to trace our shapes. So I'm going to take that dummy object and I'm going to drag it out, or rather Alt drag it out into a new group, just leaving it in there for safety, but you could actually just take it out if you want to take the original. So let's call this group logo, and we can turn it on. And let's make sure that it's centered on Y. Don't know why it's moved up like that. There's going to be a reason. I can't be bothered to work it out. Okay, so what I've also done, you probably notice, is I've swapped the text. Remember we had just a red outline like that. What I've done is I've made the face white. So I want to add a subtitle line to this. So I'm going to come to my text, format, and carriage return. I'm going to type logo reveal. Just going to select my text tool, drag over that bottom line, and I'm going to just reduce that size. I'm going to go for 85 there. So now we've got a nice little subheading. So what we need to do is we need to mask off the two parts of this. So we'll need to make a group inside here. Object new group. Let's make that 2D actually. And let's put our text into it. So now we can mask the group. We can't actually directly mask the text, you'll notice, so we have to mask the group. So let's use our rectangle mask tool and draw a mask around the top like that. And then let's also temporarily turn that off so we can see our bottom half. Select the group again, select our rectangle tool, and then draw a box around our bottom half. I'm going to make that quite big actually, for a reason that'll be obvious later on. And then turn the other mask back on again. So now we've got both of those. So what we'll be able to do with the bottom mask is to adjust its width to reveal that bottom line. So to set the timings for that, I'm going to bring in my lens flares that I'm going to use to create that reveal for that bottom line. So I'm going to make a new group, and let's call this flares. And then I'm going to import my animated flare element. Again, this is going to be in the comments for you. So the first thing we need to do is set its blend mode to add, and then we need to move its start point to 3 seconds. So let's come to 3 seconds. With it selected, we're going to come to mark and move selected in point, and that makes it start at 3 seconds. So we also need to turn off its lighting. So come down to the lighting, turn that off. And then we can duplicate it, come to its transform, and let's set a Y rotation of 180. But what we now need to do is come to that flares group and make it 2D. So then what we can do is we can animate this second mask for our second line. In actual fact, I made a mistake here with that height. Let's go for 1080, so it's plenty high, because I'm going to need to feather this, and obviously we can't feather the horizontal and vertical separately. So let us set some keyframes for this. So at this point, I'm going to set a width keyframe like that. So my mask is just a little bit bigger than the line. And then I'm going to come to 3 seconds, which is where those flares appear. And I'm going to set that width value to 0. And now it opens out, revealing the logo as we do so. Just as I say, going to add some feather there. Let's go for -50 on the feather, maybe even -75. And that just sits in a bit better. But that's why I needed to move that up so it didn't start to encroach on the top of that line. So one thing in all the excitement that I've forgotten to do is I've forgotten to do the transition to our logo. So I'm going to come to 3 seconds on the timeline again. I'm going to select my logo text, hit I on the keyboard so it only starts there. And then I'm going to add a basic motion, fade in, fade out time of 0, fade in time of 50 frames. And now it's fading in as all that is happening. And you'll see that our shapes are nicely disappearing as the logo is appearing. And this big flare action at the bottom is helping to take our eye off the ball. So there's another thing we need to worry about, which is that although we've lit up the two ends of the logo, the middle is not lit up. So we will need to add another light. So add object, light, and let's maybe increase that intensity to something like 150. just going to bring it down a little bit on Y so it's also affecting our bottom line. So maybe negative 100. But I don't want it on the whole time. I want it to come in with our logo transition. So I'm going to come to 3 seconds yet again, here to keyframe, come forward to 4 seconds, make another keyframe, come back to 3 seconds, set that down to the intensity down to 0. So now it's just coming on with that transition. Let's just put that light into that lights group for tidiness and close that on down. So let's now add a camera and let's set its position to negative 650 because I want to start kind of tight in on these shapes like that and then just pull out. So then let's animate the camera. I'm going to add a basic motion throw. At 6 seconds on the timeline, with that throw selected, I'm going to hit O, so it only runs for that duration. I'm going to set the increment to ramp to final value, and I'm going to set the Z value to 1750. And so we zoom back to that point there. Obviously, we now need to increase our background dimensions. We can just increase that scale to make sure that we're covered for the end there. So let's go for 220. So the thing we need to take care of with this camera move is that our second line is now no longer in the path of the flares. So I'm just going to adjust the line spacing there. So click there between the two lines, and then I'm just going to increase that line spacing so that it's more in the path of the flares for longer, like so. So I also want to bring up the lighting on the background as the transition is happening. So I'm going to add yet another light, and I'm going to move this back to negative 500 on Z, and I'm going to move it to negative 1000 on X. And let's just crank up its level. Let's go for something like, yes, 300. So there, I think is quite good. And let's duplicate it. Right-click, duplicate. Let's move it to positive 1000 on X. And just move it down a little bit on Y. Let's go for negative 500 or something. And I think with the second light, I'm going to decrease its intensity down to around 150 or maybe even 100. I don't want it to be too symmetrical. So with both lights selected at around 5 seconds, I think that's probably quite good. Let's keyframe their intensity, and then let's come to 3 seconds on the timeline and set their joint intensity down to 0. And that's going to make the whole thing read a bit better once we reach our final position. So let's put those two in the lights group as well. And I think I might just come down to my background group, and I'm going to just double up on those clouds. So right-click, duplicate. Let's set a horizontal scale of 64, and let's just offset it on Y. Let's go for 540 on Y. And just a little bit more sort of cloud action. Don't really want that to dominate too much. I quite like that as it is. So the final step would be to style the text. So you'll probably want to just use 3D text. As you may well know, I'm not a big fan. I'm going to use a plugin that I've been building for my own use. And it looks like that. And I think it's a little bit more interesting, and it's a lot faster to render without the same render artifacts that you often get with 3D text. So I hope that's been interesting. Obviously there's lots of ways in which you can customize this look. So I hope you're going to have fun playing around with it. Thanks very much indeed for watching, and I hope to see you again another time.